Do you hear it too? The whispers, they never stop. Not when I'm awake. Not even when I sleep. I thought I was losing my mind until I saw her. The Faceless Nun. She doesn't just watch you. She knows you. And once you've seen her, there's no escape. You might run, but she'll always find you.
Have you ever stepped into a place so silent it feels alive? That oppressive, unnatural quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every breath, every heartbeat. That's the kind of silence I found in the Carmelite Monastery of St. Lila's, nestled deep in the woods of northern Vermont. I wasn't there for prayer. My name is Caroline McVey, a freelance journalist chasing a lead on a decades-old mystery, a string of unexplained disappearances linked to this remote, crumbling convent. But I hadn't expected my investigation to unearth something unholy. The moment I entered the monastery's gates, I felt it. A shift in the air, as though the forest surrounding the property was holding its breath. The iron gates groaned behind me, sealing me inside. Ahead, the Gothic structure loomed, its spire piercing the gray January sky. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. The scent of candle wax and damp stone hung heavy. A single nun greeted me, Sister Marguerite, her face pale and thin as parchment.
We don't often receive visitors.
Her voice like wind through a graveyard. She led me through the labyrinthine halls, her black habit brushing the stone floor with a sound like whispers. I tried to explain my purpose, to investigate the history of the convent and the rumors surrounding it, but her expression tightened.
Curiosity is a dangerous vice.
That night, I stayed in a sparse guest room at the convent. The walls were bare except for a single crucifix. The bed was hard, the sheets coarse. But it wasn't the discomfort that kept me awake. It was the sound. At first it was faint, a rhythmic tapping like fingernails against wood. I thought it might be the old building settling, but then it grew louder. A shuffle of footsteps. Whispers. I opened my door and stepped into the corridor, my breath clouding in the freezing air. The dim light of a single flickering candle revealed a shadow at the far end of the hall. A figure, tall and thin, its head covered by a veil. "Sister Marguerite," I called out, but the figure didn't respond. Instead, it turned and drifted down the corridor. The next morning, I confronted Sister Marguerite. She brushed off my concerns. "The old walls play tricks on the mind," she said, though her eyes darted nervously. But I wasn't imagining things. As I explored the convent, I noticed strange details. Scratch marks on the walls, a door to the cellar, bolted shut. And the chapel. It was beautiful but unnerving, with its towering stained glass windows and rows of pews bathed in cold light. I was drawn to the altar, where an antique Bible lay open. As I approached, I noticed something odd. The pages were covered not with scripture, but with strange symbols, circles and lines that seemed to pulse when I looked at them. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around to see a nun standing behind me. Her face was obscured by her veil, but her voice was low, guttural. "Sister Marguerite?" I asked, though I knew it wasn't her. The figure stepped closer, and as it did, the veil began to lift, just slightly. Beneath it, there was no face, only a black void, deep and endless. I woke up in my room, drenched in sweat, my heart hammering. Had it been a dream? A hallucination? But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My door was bolted from the outside. I banged on it, yelling for help, and eventually, Sister Marguerite appeared. Her face was calm, but her hands trembled as she unbolted the door. "You've been sleepwalking," she said, her tone too measured. But I knew better. something was wrong. Terribly wrong. That night, I decided to escape. I waited until the early hours when the convent was silent. With only a flashlight to guide me, I made my way to the cellar door. The bolts were old and rusted, but I managed to pry them loose. The cellar was colder than the rest of the monastery, the air thick with a metallic stench. My flashlight beam swept across the stone walls, illuminating chains, broken crucifixes, and more of those strange symbols etched into the floor. Then I saw it. A figure kneeling in the center of the room, its back to me. It was the nun from before, the one with the black void beneath her veil. She began to chant, her voice layered and unnatural, as though a dozen mouths were speaking at once. The symbols on the floor glowed faintly, and the air grew heavy, charged with something I can only describe as wrong. When I stepped back, my flashlight clattered to the ground. The nun's chant stopped abruptly. She turned, and this time, the veil fell away completely. Her face, or what should have been her face, was a mass of writhing shadows, tendrils that reached for me as she whispered, "You shouldn't have come here." I don't remember how I escaped. I woke up outside the gates, my car keys clutched in my hand, my body covered in scratches. The convent loomed in the distance, silent as a grave. I drove away, never looking back. But the nightmares haven't stopped. Every night I see her, the faceless nun, her whispers growing louder, promising that one day I'll return. And deep down, I know she's right.